Today we're going to talk about biofields. So what are biofields? That's a weird word, and why are they important? Why should you care? So today we're going to talk a little bit about biofields. I think you guys are going to be surprised at some of this information. At a high level, let's just say, I'm a world expert, let's say, on the endocannabinoid system, right? And so the endocannabinoid system works by fats, right? So it's when you eat dietary fats, they are broken down into things called endocannabinoids. Partly, they're also used for fuel. They stick on triglycerides. But when you eat dietary fats, basically by virtue of eating dietary fats and by virtue of building endocannabinoids in our intestinal lumen, we're giving feedback to our body that tells us a lot about our nutritional state. So your body is kind of two things. It's kind of this fat system, if you will, and there's a lot to that fat system. The endocannabinoid system is a big part of that fat system. And you're also a water-based system. Okay, so there's water. You have water in your blood. Water in your lymphatic. Your blood is for the most part water soluble. Situation. So it's water-based. You can carry fats and oils in your blood, and you do so in things called glomerulons, and that's where how cholesterol is measured. So VDLs, HDLs, and there's two other ones that you use to move fats around or oils around, in your body. But you do so in water-soluble systems, okay? And that's because you're electric. Your body is electric. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit today is the electric principles of your body, and what that's all about. And should you be concerned about that? Is it a important thing, non-important thing? And just the fact that we're talking about it should tell you that it's a pretty important thing. So let's dive right in. We all understand, like that dead thing that we're looking at, roadkill by the side of the road. Well, what differentiates this dead deer from a live deer, right? We can sort of observe that it's decaying and decomposed. Again, it no longer has the life force, whatever that means. It's no longer animated, whatever that means. But clearly it's no longer, let's say, electric, and it no longer is hydrated, right? And so let's look at a little bit about, what do we call life? I mean, how do we distinguish a live thing from a dead thing, right? So the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, being alive or being dead, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. So if you're decomposing, if you're more inorganic matter than organic matter, you're considered dead, right? But it has to do what I want you to get you to think about is decomposition. Okay, so if we're trending toward death, we're decomposing. If we're trending toward life, we're recomposing. Is the best way to say it. And can that happen? I don't know. It can happen in certain ways. Certainly, can you recompose yourself? Yes, I believe you can. You certainly can ionically, which is what we're going to talk about and where we're going. But what is life, right? So what does it mean to be alive? And that's a pretty important thing, when we go back to sort of what's the difference between us and this thing on the side of the road. It kind of hurts the mind. It twizzles the almonds to think about, right? So it's kind of difficult. But if we boil it down in kind of a science way, we're going to find out that you need water. So you need to be able to be moving water, let's say, through your living system in order to be, considered alive. So all living things, from tiny cyanobacteria to giant blue whales, need water to survive. Without water, life as we know it would not exist. And most of us realize this. The other thing that's important for life, and again, what's the difference between that dead thing and you? is you're circulating ions through you. So you're moving, just like you're moving water. And again, we have to take in water, we urinate out water, so we input water, we're eliminating water. But what do we do with all that water? We're moving ions. We use water for our blood, we use water for our lymph, we use water in a lot of different ways. But we use water because it's ionic, because I can move things that are electric, that have energy through it. And I can move those things to more static and, let's say, more dense areas of your body that need those things that aren't as conductive or transmissive. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. But in order to be alive, right, I have to have water, I have to be hydrated, and I have to have this life force, this movement, let's say, of ions or electricity, or kind of however you want to look at it, but it's definitely physically ties to ions. So, and again, in this dead thing over here, is this deer moving ions in and out of itself? No, it's becoming devoid of ions. It can know. Basically what happens is the bacteria and the cells inside of this deer, again, the living cells, let's say, that were living inside of this deer, needed to be able to have oxygen and water and ions to be able to do something called oxidative phosphorylation, which is what we need to be able to do to stay alive, right? So that's what mitochondria need to be able to do to provide you energy. If they can't do it, then you're not going to get energy. But at some point, when those things aren't available, then things called gram-negative bacteria begin to take over. They don't need oxygen, they don't need ions, they don't need water, they just need a fermenter. They just need to be able to ferment. So they start fermenting, and that's what's happening to this carcass. Is it's being fermented, it's being broken down by these gram-negative bacteria. Yeah, so pretty interesting, right? So again, this is all going to relate back to you at some point, and gram-negative bacteria kind of mean that we're, those guys think that we're dead and trying to decompose us. Okay, so but point of this is that sort of two critical things that are responsible for you being animated, you being alive, and that's water and that's ions. So you have to be able to move sort of electricity and electrons through you, and you need to be able to do that in water, and we need to constantly resupply and resustain that water. So metal ions are fundamental elements for the maintenance of lifespan of plants, animals, and humans. Their substantial role in biological systems was recognized a long time ago. They are essential for the maintenance of life, and their absence can cause growth disorders, severe malfunction, carcinogenesis, or death. Carcinogenesis, cancer, or death. Okay, so pretty dang important, right? And it's really interesting when you look at really severe disease like autism. Let's do this. Autism is going to be something that is going to be a dysregulation of metal. So autism and metal regulation. And again, the fact that autistic people, so again, this is what you want to see when you're searching for stuff. And you've got, fetal and postnatal metal dysregulation in autism, whole blood zinc and copper levels in children with autism, lack of association between autism and 4 heavy metal regulatory genes. Well, that's a lack of. But anyway, you can kind of tell that there's lots on metal in autism, which is kind of what I wanted to get you to see. So autistic people are dysregulated in how they deal with metal, which would indicate that they're dysregulated ionically, which is interesting. Okay, so if you go look at like ions and you're going to find some stuff about metal, but that's it. The term you're going to find that you really need to find is something called electrolytes. So this is what we want to look at, is electrolytes. These are how we're moving electrons around inside of us. So these guys are used for just all different kinds of reactions inside of you. But you have to be able to move ions. You got to be able to move ions, and these guys got to be able to move back and forth and kind of flow like a river. Well, it's looking like in disease, guess what? you slow down the movement of ions. You leak ions, and you basically slow down the movement of them inside of you. So we want kind of a situation almost like a washing machine, you can think about, and where most of us are at is this just, hardly any kind of agitation or torque, I guess, in our systems. Torque is a deeper thinking about this because that's really literally how it works is through torque. Okay, so all right, Chip, you've told me all this stuff. Yeah, I need ions and I need water. Well, what does that mean? How does that relate to me? Is this measurable? Does it matter to my health and all that? Yes, it does. So if you want to research this yourself, the term is something called biofield. Bioelectrons, biomagnetics, bio. So, but your biofield is, I'll just read you this definition from Biofield Therapies, American Counseling Association. So the biofield is a large field of energy that surrounds and extends out from the body about 8 feet. No part of the energy system is visible to the human eye, but the biofield can be felt with the hands, often through either pressure or temperature changes. 8 feet is a pretty long way, right? Do you feel uncomfortable in a crowded room? It's probably because, your biofield is being invaded by someone else. What is your comfortable distance? At 8 feet, can you begin to sense, things from other people's biofields? So doesn't that just lend itself to some fascinating discussion and fascinating thoughts? Does the biofield exist? Uh-oh, my internet appears to be funky. Anyway, so, but anyway, the thought of a biofield is interesting. And so what would this look like? Potentially what would the biofield look like? It would look something like this, okay? Where we've got this extension of magnetic lines that would flow out from kind of our north pole, which is our head, and be connected to our south pole, which is our feet. There's a little bit more to this. If you're alive and you're sort of moving ions in and out, this field will torque, and it will torque kind of to the right on the bottom and to the left on the top. That is something called the torsion field, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is the way that I kind of think it looks, to me. So what would this biofield, look like if you could actually see it? Something like this, right? But it wouldn't potentially be this robust for all of us. You could tell probably a lot about health and disease by evaluating this biofield if you could see it. So cool stuff, huh? All right, so quick lesson in quantum mechanics because we just got to get into a little bit of the quanta as we talk about this. So quantum mechanics is, we've all had our high school chemistry class, right? We learned about protons and neutrons and electrons and all that stuff. Well, protons are pretty important guys, and this is a picture of a proton. So it turns out a proton is made up of smaller particles, or things called quarks, and things that stick quarks together called gluons. And quarks always come in threes, at least in more advanced particles like a proton. So a proton is just 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. You will also notice that these quarks have a color, and the color is important in quarks because they have different properties, and they call them spin properties, which we're going to talk about in a second. And they equate those to color, but you can change the color of quarks, which is interesting magnetically. You can do a lot of things with magnets, right? So anyway, this is quantum mechanics 101. This is what a proton looks like. It is 2 up and 1 down quark, and they have to be of different colors. So all of them have to be different colored in order to make a proton. Isn't that cool? So, quick story about torsion fields. I think this is kind of a cool story. You will notice pseudoscience in the very, let's say, deep state Wikipedia definition. Interesting thing I learned a while back is these guys got to tell us the truth. So they have to give us the truth in some form, which is useful, if you sort of are a good discerner of information, let's just say. So they got to give us the truth, even though they might try to hide the truth in things in terms like pseudoscience. But torsion fields are something that the Russians started studying in the early 1900s, even before that to a certain degree. It's probably in here. No, it's probably not, because we're not going to give any credits to the Russians for anything. Oh yeah, here's sort of Center for Non-Traditional. Yeah, there's a Russian guy right there. But torsion fields really were first discovered when they were looking at parapsychology. So they were trying to figure out action at a distance, right? So they knew that in some cases people were telepathic, in some cases people could affect reaction or some outcome at a distance, right? And they knew also that there was some action at a distance things happening in quantum mechanics, which wasn't called quantum mechanics at the time. But they tried to figure this out, and so they were able to identify fields that are associated with living things. And these fields are called torsion fields. And the cool thing is they can be measured. And so we actually have a device. If you look at bioresonance, so bioresonance is, let's see if I can do this or we're going to screw things up. I'll show you kind of what these guys look like, but this is what we use to measure, and these measure biofields. Okay, so some of it, this one looks like the old Scientology device, and a lot of these guys do because they're skin galvanization. But our guy uses headphones. He kind of looks like this. So he uses headphones, and you hold a device, but the headphones are measuring these torsion fields, believe it or not, which is kind of cool. And you can measure these with if you have the right kind of antenna. In Western science, so you don't get the pseudoscience, so you guys are like, Chip, you're talking about crank stuff and torsion field. It says right there, pseudoscience. Okay, well, if you go to Western science, there's something called spinor fields. And so you can look up spinor fields. But this is the idea that basically electromagnetically things are connected. So these are belts that are connected to a cube, and then this cube moves. But the belts never become entangled as the cube moves. And so that's the kind of cool and important thing to see, is that these belts do not become, they don't interfere with each other even as this spirals. So this is a spinor field or a torsion field. Again, as you affect these magnetic ley lines, you can think of this as a quark, okay, in the middle. You can also think of this as a chakra point in the middle, if you relate this to you, or a sort of a nexus point in a plant. But these spin, these move, and that's what life is all about. Really, is our magnetism and kind of how we spin and move in fields, which is cool stuff. And that's what really defines life in a way. So where does all this come from? The sun, right? So, and you can spell that S-O-N if you'd like. But the sun is where the energy comes from, let's say, to rotate the spirals, to create the biofields, to create the torque that you need to sustain life, all right? So without the sun, there ain't no torque and you ain't living. It's really literally that simple. So the other cool thing about this is we probably have different modes of being. And what I mean by that is you're to me, it looks like you're designed to live in different, let's say, densities. And by densities, I mean densities of matter. So I don't think it can get any more dense than it is right here on Earth right now. But you're kind of built to live in a very dense situation, and right now it's so dense here on Earth. That's why many of us, it's a lot of gravity, right? So it's hard to sort of, we're not maybe at our best physically in this particular environment. But your body, it looks like to me, which is really cool, is built to run in these different environments. So, potentially you could run, on Venus. I'm not saying you could, but, potentially your body could energetically elevate to a point where the reactions that you need are not the same. So would you still need oxygen? I don't know. Would you still need water? I don't know. But at some point, energetically, you can run on ions, rather than physical things like food and water. You probably always need water, is looking like, and, ions. But we can exist, in different modes is what it's looking like, which is really cool. And if you were going to build, if you go with me that life is on other planets and the human form, potentially is on other planets, well, then that makes sense, doesn't it? Because other planets would have different physical, material properties than this planet does, and we'd have to, our physical form would have to be able to be built to sustain in those different environments. Anyway, the sun, isn't that cool? So we literally live by the sun. It creates these torsion fields. These torsion fields and water are kind of what define life. And again, that could happen in any kind of physical environment, but here it's very solid and physical. And so we have physicality as a result. All right, so that's about all I have for you guys today. Hopefully, you can kind of, again, we're headed somewhere, and we're headed to really a point of a deeper understanding about how you work, a breaking, let's say, of the. It's not a lie that you're told by pharma and education. It's just more of a little box, right? So if I teach you this little box, and I know all about this. I'm magic. I'm like a god. I can do all kinds of things. And you go, wow, how did he do that? Because I know this and you know this, right? So it's a way to control and compartmentalize information. And that's what you've been taught about. You've been taught this, right, about how you work. And the box is huge. So how do we teach you about that box, and how do I sort of get you there? Well, that's what I'm trying to do. So we'll continue on with other chip talks. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. Again, if you're on YouTube, subscribe and do all the stuff that they always tell you to do. Forward these around. Feel free to share them. I am trying to give you knowledge and information that I want you to share. I want you to understand. We'll always have ways to, sell you things, let's say, with supplements or consulting or, whatever it is. But I'm giving you this knowledge freely, and I want you to take it. I want you to share it. So anyway, see you guys. Love you guys, and we'll